Right now, there's a front stretched across the northern half of the country that looks harmless. It isn't. Over the next 72 hours, it's going to wake up, and when it does, millions of people from the plains to the Great Lakes are going to find out just how fast a quiet setup can turn dangerous. Let's start with what's happening right now, because Saturday is already loading. If you're in Kansas City, Omaha, or Des Moines, that setup we've been watching for days is right on schedule, and it's shifted your direction. There's a marginal risk covering more than 5 million people, stretching from the Central Plains into the Missouri Valley. Now, here's the catch, and it's the same catch that's been messing with model agreement all week. There's a layer of warm air sitting up high, and it's acting like a lid on top of the atmosphere. That lid is keeping things capped, which means the models genuinely can't agree on when or where storms are actually going to break through. The real window probably doesn't open until after 1 in the morning, once warm, humid air surges north and reignites that warm front sitting across the mid-Missouri Valley. Southwest Iowa has the best shot at seeing severe storms during the afternoon hours, and once that happens, a complex is going to cross the Missouri River and roll east, and when it does, damaging wind becomes the headline threat. There's almost 1.5 inches of moisture loaded into the atmosphere above that region, so storms are going to keep tracking east along that front through the entire night, and each new round is basically going to retrace the path of the one before it. That's the dangerous part. This is all happening while most people are asleep, and flash flooding becomes a real concern in a setup like that. This is exactly why I keep telling people to have a weather radio on their nightstand. It's going to override itself. It's going to wake you up the second a warning drops, whether that's a tornado warning or a flash flood warning. And it does that even when your phone is silent, and even when you can't hear a siren outside. That's not a luxury item, that's a basic safety tool, especially for anyone living in a flood-prone area. Meanwhile, farther east, there's a small disturbance that's going to spark some afternoon storms running from northern Virginia into eastern Pennsylvania and New Jersey, and that includes Bethlehem, where a major music festival is wrapping up this weekend. If you're on those festival grounds, you need to know where your nearest solid building is, because these storms are fully capable of snapping branches and cutting power in a hurry. Nobody wants to be caught out in an open field when that kind of wind shows up. Now let's talk about the heat, because Saturday is going to feel almost unbearable in parts of the desert Southwest. We're talking about a heat index of 115 degrees, and that's thanks to a 4 corners heat dome that's sitting in the top 5% of intensity for the month of August. Let that sink in for a second. It's normal for it to be hot in August out there. This isn't normal hot. This is a top 5% event, and heat warnings are already up, and they're going to stay up through Sunday night. There is one small break coming, though. Arizona is actually going to get a slight reprieve, because drier air moving in off the Rockies is going to knock some of that moisture back. That means storms are mostly going to stay hugging the high terrain and the border, while the deeper desert areas mainly deal with outflow winds and some blowing dust instead of full storms. At the same time, up in the northern Rockies, fuels are staying critically dry, and that's a problem on its own, because it means wildfire smoke is going to keep streaming southeast. That smoke plume is going to be thick enough to actually shave 2 to 4 degrees off temperatures across parts of the Midwest. If you've been sending me pictures of orange, smoky sunsets the last few days, that's exactly why, and that trend is going to continue. But there is one genuine bright spot in all of this, and I want to give credit where it's due. On Saturday, Minnesota and western Wisconsin are looking at what is honestly going to be the nicest weather anywhere in the entire country over the next several days. High pressure is going to park itself right behind Friday's cold front, and that's going to deliver picture-perfect conditions. We're talking about Eau Claire near 78 degrees, Rochester at 79, St. Cloud at 81, dew points sitting comfortably in the upper 50s, and barely any wind or clouds to speak of. The Twin Cities are going to ride right along the edge of that, sitting in the low 80s. That is a patio dinner kind of day. That is a lake day. That is a hike without sweating through your shirt kind of day. There's going to be a little bit of haze drifting through from that wildfire smoke. But for the most part, this is about as close to a perfect summer day as you're going to find anywhere in the country right now. So if you're in that region, I would enjoy it, because the pattern flips fast after this. Sunday is when flooding takes over as the main headline, and it's worth understanding why the setup is so tricky. There's a slight risk of excessive rainfall running from southeast Minnesota through northern Indiana, and that risk actually carries forward into Monday as well. The core problem here is repetition. You're going to get a complex of storms moving through in the morning, and then another separate round is going to fire up again Sunday night. When you add those 2 rounds together, you're looking at nearly 2 inches of moisture sitting in the atmosphere above these areas, and that's exactly how basements end up flooding in neighborhoods that were completely dry at breakfast that same morning. This kind of event happens in 2 speeds at once. It happens fast because individual downpours can dump a lot of rain in a short window, But it also happens slowly because the ground has to absorb round after round before it finally gives up and starts sending water into places it shouldn't be. You're going to see a lot of intermittent downpours through the day, and then at some point, one of those downpours is going to get genuinely heavy, and in whichever spot that happens to land, that's where we could see some serious flash flooding develop. Severe weather actually becomes the secondary story on Sunday, but it's still worth watching. There's a marginal risk covering more than 24 million people, stretching from the plains into the southern Great Lakes, and that includes Chicago and Indianapolis. Ahead of the front, dew points are going to climb into the 60s and 70s, and wind speeds are going to be changing anywhere from 45 to 65 miles per hour as you go up in height through the atmosphere. When you combine rising moisture with that kind of wind shear, you get storms that are capable of organizing into late-day clusters, and some of those clusters can become isolated producers of 60-mile-per-hour wind gusts. If you're flying anywhere near this region, keep an eye on your flights too. This week's air traffic control outage in Minnesota already grounded planes across a big chunk of the Midwest, and more storms rolling through Minneapolis, St. Paul, Omaha, and Des Moines is honestly the last thing that system needs right now. Unfortunately, that's exactly what's on the way. Now let's get into Monday, because this is genuinely the day everyone in this stretch of the country needs to be paying attention to. This is the same Great Lakes wind corridor I've been talking about for the past couple of days, but the picture has gotten sharper and the numbers have gotten bigger. The Storm Prediction Center now has a 15% severe weather risk covering more than 26 million people, running from northern Illinois into western Pennsylvania. That includes Chicago, Milwaukee, Detroit, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh. For an outlook that's still a few days out, a 15% risk covering that many major cities is a genuinely loud signal. It's the only highlighted severe weather area anywhere on the entire 4 to 8 day outlook map. Everything else in the country is quiet by comparison. All the attention on this particular stretch is warranted, and there's a very specific reason to be extra cautious about it. The Wisconsin State Fair is in full swing right now in West Allis, just outside Milwaukee, and Monday afternoon is looking like a window where 60-plus mile-per-hour winds could move through that exact area. Some of that activity could come uncomfortably close to the fairgrounds themselves. If you're planning to be there, or if you know someone who is, keep an eye on the sky and keep your phone alerts turned all the way up. Here's what's actually driving the setup. Winds coming up from the south are going to be pulling off the plains, and that's going to pump dew points into the mid to upper 70s across this entire corridor. That's what we call swamp air, and it's the fuel source for everything that follows. Northern Illinois into western Pennsylvania is the favored zone specifically because low-level winds are strongest right there, which means storm convergence has the best chance of happening in that exact stretch. Winds high up in the atmosphere are running around 60 miles per hour, and that is more than enough shear to spin up supercells if the right ingredients come together. As the day goes on, the expectation is that individual storms are going to merge into line segments and clusters rather than staying as isolated cells. Damaging wind is shaping up to be the primary hazard here, mainly because those upper-level winds are aimed almost straight down toward the surface. Any cluster that forms has a real chance of evolving into a developing line, and some of those lines could become widespread producers of damaging wind across a wide area. The timing window to really watch is the afternoon into the evening. If you've got a Monday night ball game, a patio dinner planned, or a boat out on Lake Michigan, make sure you have a fast way to get inside. Because when these storms move through, they're going to move through with real intensity. Now, not every city in that broader region is looking at the same level of coverage. Eastern Nebraska and Iowa are trending thinner in terms of storm coverage on Monday, and the sharpest focus for now is staying north of Indianapolis, Cincinnati, and St. Louis. That's where the best chance for organized storms currently sits. But as we get closer to Monday, I'll be able to sharpen those details even further. There's also a fair amount of wiggle room baked into the Sunday night into Monday transition specifically. There's an overnight complex of storms expected Sunday night that could leave behind a mess of clouds and outflow boundaries, and depending on exactly where those boundaries settle, Monday's storms could end up firing in a slightly different location than currently expected. If the sun manages to break out ahead of that new activity, the atmospheric ceiling for instability actually goes up, and honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if this outlook eventually gets upgraded to an enhanced risk once we get closer to the event. That's how confident the signal is looking right now, even with a few days of lead time still on the clock. Once we get past Monday, the story doesn't just end because there's a long frontal boundary stretched out across the entire northern tier of the country. It's going to start slowly drifting south as the week goes on. Each night's storms are going to leave behind outflow that nudges that boundary a little farther south. And heavy rain is going to keep focusing right along that line. That sets up a multi-day rain event for the Ohio Valley and the Central Appalachians, running roughly from Monday through Wednesday, with local rainfall totals in the range of 2 to 4 inches, wherever storms happen to repeat over the same spot. And in some locations, especially in the hills of eastern Kentucky and West Virginia, totals could end up running even higher than that. In terrain like that, water only has one place to go, and that's downhill, fast. Repeated downpours hitting steep terrain can send creeks up in a hurry and put water across valley roads in almost no time at all. So if you live in that region, this is a stretch of days worth paying close attention to, especially overnight. While all of that is happening up north, the pattern down south is shifting too. The ridge of high pressure that's been sitting over the southwest is going to slide east a little bit, and as it does, it's going to reopen a moisture channel running from the Gulf of Mexico into the southern plains and southeast. That moisture surge is really the leading edge of the next heat wave, and it's a serious one. Heat indices are expected to run from 105 to 115 degrees across Gulf Coast cities, and even away from the coast, Oklahoma and North Texas are looking at actual air temperatures running anywhere from 100 to 105 degrees. That's not a heat index number, that's the real thermometer reading, which tells you how intense this stretch is shaping up to be. By Tuesday, the frontal boundary sags a little farther south into the northern Ohio Valley, while the deeper pocket of storm fuel hangs back farther west, closer to Omaha. That means scattered storms are likely to fire near that axis during the afternoon and evening hours, and there is an isolated severe threat tied to that activity. The problem is that predictability is still too low right now to pin down an exact corridor for where the worst of those storms will actually track. What we do know with more confidence is that heavy rain is going to continue rolling over the Ohio Valley and the Appalachian Mountains, with totals in the range of 1 inch to 2 inches of additional water on top of what's already fallen. Every bit of that moisture sitting up in the atmosphere is going to end up landing on already saturated ground. If you're under one of these storms and it feels like it's raining harder than usual, that's exactly why there's simply more moisture available up there than what we typically deal with in a normal summer setup. And down south, the heat is going to keep building through Tuesday as well, with heat index values running 105 to 115 degrees, and Oklahoma staying locked into triple-digit actual air temperatures. What makes this particular heat wave especially dangerous is that overnight lows are only dropping into the 70s in a lot of these areas, which means homes and bodies never really get a chance to cool off and recover before the next hot day begins. That kind of stretches especially hard on vulnerable populations, on outdoor workers, and on anyone who doesn't have reliable access to air conditioning. So please check on the people in your life who might be at risk during a stretch like this. There is a little bit of good news by Wednesday. The extended rain window over the Ohio Valley and Appalachians is on its last well-supported day, meaning there's expected to be one more round of rain, but this looks like it should be the tail end of the multi-day deluge, rather than another new beginning. That said, localized flooding is still very much in play even after the rain tapers off. Because after 2 straight days of heavy rain on Monday and Tuesday, the ground is essentially saturated at this point, functioning like a full sponge that's already near capacity. In that kind of setup, it doesn't take much. Even a single inch of additional rain can cause real problems in spots that have already taken on that much water or more over the previous 48 hours. There's still some energy available for severe thunderstorms to tap into on Wednesday, but again, confidence remains too low right now to draw any kind of reliable corridor on a map for exactly where that risk will materialize. Meanwhile, the southern heat is not backing off. It's the same sticky pattern, with overnight lows offering essentially no meaningful reset for anyone trying to cool down after the heat of the day. By this point in the stretch, that kind of grind really starts wearing on people, especially anyone who's been living without decent air conditioning for multiple days in a row. Wednesday is shaping up to be a genuinely tough day across a lot of the South. Out west, the story is shifting in a different direction entirely. Moisture is surging back into the region for what could end up being the most active stretch of monsoon season so far this summer. Even in Phoenix, which usually deals with monsoon storms in a fairly manageable way, there's a real possibility we start seeing some flooding problems develop. That's something worth keeping an eye on as we move further into the week, because a busy monsoon pattern in a desert environment can create flash flooding risks very quickly, especially in low-lying areas and normally dry washes that aren't built to handle sudden heavy rainfall. Now, as we push into Thursday and Friday, I do want to be upfront with you that the farther out we get in a forecast like this, the more uncertainty naturally creeps in. That's just the nature of extended forecasting, and I'd rather be honest about that than pretend we have pinpoint accuracy 5, 6, 7 days out. That said, here's the general shape of what we're expecting. A moist, unstable air mass is going to be sitting over much of the eastern half of the country, stretching from the plains down through the southeast and even into the Ohio and Tennessee valleys. With only weak, large-scale support behind it, this is going to look like your classic pop-up August thunderstorm pattern, the kind where one part of town gets soaked and the next neighborhood over stays completely dry. It happens every single August, but we're really approaching the peak of that seasonal pattern right now. The bigger story as we get later into the week is going to be an air mass flip up north, Canadian air is going to spill down into the upper Midwest and Great Lakes region, and that's going to knock high temperatures down into the 70s, with overnight lows dropping into the 50s in some spots. After the stretch of heat and humidity a lot of that region has been dealing with, I have a feeling a lot of people are going to genuinely welcome that kind of change once it arrives. And since we're already looking this far ahead, let's stretch it out even further, all the way to the window running from August 14th through the 20th, just because it's worth knowing what's potentially on the horizon. The Climate Prediction Center currently has a moderate risk of extreme heat covering the southern and central plains, running through the lower Mississippi Valley and into the southeast. That moderate risk window runs Friday through Sunday, which lines up with the 14th through the 16th, and it comes with a 30 to 50% chance of heat topping the 90th percentile for this time of year. In plain terms, that means it's shaping up to be seriously hot, the kind of hot where heat index values are expected to stay in that 105 to 115 degree range across the southeast, with a number of locations flirting with record warm overnight temperatures as well. At the same time, there's also a slight risk of heavy rain running from the desert southwest and the Rockies into the plains, and even reaching into the Mississippi and Ohio valleys, covering the window from the 14th through the 17th. Arizona is trending noticeably wetter than normal within that stretch, and across much of the Midwest, 3-day rainfall totals over an inch are looking increasingly likely. That's actually good news for a specific part of the country, because Nebraska, Colorado, and Wyoming are currently dealing with a pretty significant drought, and any meaningful rainfall heading their way over the coming weeks would genuinely help. Let me also touch on something that ties all of these days together, because it's easy to get lost in city names and percentages and lose sight of the actual point of a forecast like this, which is helping you make good decisions before the weather arrives, instead of scrambling once it's already on top of you. When you're looking at a stretch like this, with severe storms one day, flooding the next, and dangerous heat running underneath almost the entire pattern, the smartest thing you can do is separate the threats and handle each one on its own terms. For the severe weather days, that means knowing your safe room ahead of time, whether that's a basement, an interior room, or the lowest level of a sturdy building. And it means having a way to receive warnings that doesn't depend on your phone being charged, connected, or even turned on. For the flooding threat, that means never driving into standing water, even water that looks shallow, because it takes surprisingly little moving water to sweep a vehicle off the road, and it means paying attention to those repeat round setups I mentioned, since the danger often isn't the first round of rain, it's the third or fourth round landing on ground that's already full. And for the heat, especially down south where overnight lows aren't giving anyone a real break, that means checking on elderly neighbors, making sure outdoor workers are taking real breaks, and never underestimating how dangerous a heat wave becomes once the nights stop cooling off. None of these threats are unusual on their own. We deal with severe storms, flash flooding, and summer heat waves every single year. What makes this stretch worth your attention is that all three are stacking up back to back to back across an enormous footprint of the country, hitting some of the most densely populated corridors we track all year, from the Great Lakes down through the Ohio Valley and into the Gulf Coast. So here's where that leaves us. Over the next several days, we've got a setup that starts with scattered, severe storms and dangerous heat this weekend, shifts into a serious flooding threat by Sunday, and then builds into the most significant severe weather day of the entire stretch on Monday, when 26 million people from Chicago to Pittsburgh sit under the only real severe threat anywhere on the map. After that, the focus shifts toward a multi-day flooding event across the Ohio Valley and Appalachians, while a dangerous and prolonged heat wave builds across the south with almost no overnight relief. That front that looked harmless at the start of this forecast doesn't stay quiet for long, and by the time we get through Monday, it's going to have made its presence felt across a huge stretch of the country. If you live anywhere in this footprint, from the Central Plains, through the Great Lakes, and down into the south, this is a stretch of days worth paying close attention to, keeping your alerts turned on, and having a plan in place before the storms actually arrive rather than after.